Hello, everyone, and welcome to another preview here on the Cycling Dane. Today, we are covering the 105th edition of Il Lombardia, the race of the falling leaves. And I'm delighted to be joined by one of the friends of the channel, Patrick from Outdo Cycling, who's very close to 1,000 subscribers. So do check out his channel in the link down below. But anyways, Patrick, great to have you here. And Il Lombardia, it's the last of the five monuments and sometimes very forgotten about, but definitely an interesting race. What's kind of your thoughts on the race as a whole as a cycling fan?
I really like it. It's a good crescendo to the year. I think it's nice to get these Italian races kind of smacked into a week. I think they're all very exciting. It's actually one of my favorite times of the year. It's kind of the last hurrah in the cycling season where I can really just like get it all out of me before finally kind of we all hibernate away going towards the cyclocross season. I really like Il Lombardia. I think it provides a different kind of spectacle. It's a different style of race, and you usually get different riders as opposed to some of the other one day kind of monument races that we kind of get the winners for there. Of course, there's like Gacha can kind of just compete in everything, but like the winners of like Mollema in the past few years or whatever, and like Nibali, it's just very daring solo attempts that I kind of spring to mind, and I really like it as a kind of final kind of farewell to the cycling season.
I think that was a very poignant summation of the race as a whole. And yeah, as you said, we've seen absolutely incredible list of winners. There's not really been any rider who's defended this title. So yeah, it doesn't look like, if we look at the statistics, that Tadej Pogacar is going to do that. But more about that later. Anyways, the 2022 route is a bit different from last year. It's a bit longer, starting from Bergamo in the north of Italy and finishing in the beautiful city of Como, close to the border of Switzerland. But what is kind of the difference between this route and the one we saw Tadej Pogacar win last year?
Well, there seems to be a reduction in the length and the severity of the climbs, and it seems to be a bit more of a course suited towards the punchers this year, with some lower altitude mountains kind of ranging anywhere between 400 meters up to 600 meters in the last 50 kilometers of racing, as opposed to last year, where we had the likes of the Desena and also the Passo di Ganda, both of which seem to go over 1,000 meters and have a severe gradients of 7%, 6%, and overall can last upwards of 10 kilometers. Those are not seen this year, so it definitely favors more of the punchy riders as opposed to the pure climbers, I think.
Anyway, with this, the 2022 edition coming so quickly, where better to go than the favorites now? And the favorite we're going to start with is the one we've mentioned so many times already, Tadej Pogacar. Yeah, Patrick, I don't know how you feel about this. He didn't win the Giro d'Emilia, which he looked certain for many people to be the hot favorite to add his name to a race that Primoz Roglic has won. Equally in the road race at the World Championships, wasn't quite firing on all cylinders, wasn't able to, however we want to say it, tactically not following Remco Evenepoel, and we all know that he won the GP Montreal. So how do you think his chances are at this year's edition of Il Lombardia?
I think he certainly comes in as one of the favourites. That's absolutely no doubt in my mind about it. And Pogacar has this strange ability to really switch it on when he enters Italy, which is just seems to be an absolute enigma. He won Strade Bianchi this year, fifth at Milan San Remo. He won Tirreno Adriatico, of course, last year. He won Il Lombardia, but he also came fourth at Milan Torino, third at Trevali Varsin, and he just seems incredibly proficient at switching it on in Italy just out of nowhere. And I really think that it's just a style of racing for one day races, especially over quite steep, repetitive kind of climbs. He just seems to really relish that kind of racing as opposed to other kind of GC riders who might prefer longer climbs. Pogacar definitely seems a bit more well-rounded as a racer in comparison to GC riders who might be more hoping for some longer climbs over like a big mountain day. Pogacar just has a few more strings to his bow as opposed to some other pure climbers who might struggle to kind of try and find their niche in this race to try and make the most of it to kind of beat all their other competitors, whereas Pogacar can kind of do it all. So it's really hard to try and say that he's not the favourite because he really is.
Yeah, that's true. He's definitely such an all-round rider. But in support, UAE are sending, as always, a very strong team. Rui Costa, Joao Almeida, Rafa Maika, Diego Ulisi, Jan Polanc, David Formolo, George Bennett. So the team isn't really going to be a weakness on that front either. such a solid unit from them.
You could argue it's probably the strongest team in the race when you consider that towards the finale, Pogacar should have multiple riders who should be able to try and set a hard pace on a climb and launch an attack. I'm thinking that the likes of Almeida, Formolo, and Ulissi, who both of those last two look very good at Emilia just the other day. Pogacar should certainly be surrounded by lots of teammates in case of any surprise attacks by some kind of long-range hopefuls. So I think that Pogacar, coming in as the favourite for the race and also with the strongest team, certainly looks like a hard outfit to beat, don't you think?
Yeah, I completely agree. But moving on to his, well, developing career rival almost, Jonas Winger is coming here as well after doing very well at the Crow race, taking 2 stage wins, ultimately not winning the overall, returning to racing for the first time since his triumph in the Tour de France. But yeah, not really renowned as a monument rider. He's won one day, well, a few one day races in the past. But yeah, how do you see his chances faring? And Jumbo Visma are bringing somewhat of a really strong team as well. Koen Bouwman, Tobias Foss, the new world time trial champion, Nathan Van Hooijdonk, Eduardo Effini, Sam Omen, Sepp Kuss, Leonard Hofstadter, and Jos van Emden. So there's plenty of strong riders within that team.
I think you're right. There's definitely going to be a need for Vingegaard to have the riders, probably more than likely Sepp Kuss, Foss and Bouwman in the finale to try and counter just the sheer power that UAE are bringing to this race. I think that Vingegaard, like you say, he has done well in some one-day races in the past, but especially when you look back this year, it's quite few and far between. Of course, he won the Drone Classic, which was earlier this year. Last year at Il Lombardia, he came 14th in this race. But I feel like Vingegaard has definitely stepped it up this year. Of course, last year he was a bit unknown before that Tour de France performance. But I think that this year he's really developed into just, he's stepped it up another level, and he seems just to be, he's gone from kind of like down on this kind of level to he's just stepped it up to be one of the top riders in the world. Of course, I feel like his weakness will be if it comes down to a mano on mano, sort of similar to last year. If he comes down to just against Pogacar, it's going to be really hard to beat him in a sprint. There were multiple times this year in the Tour where we saw that Vingegaard could not beat Pogacar in a sprint. In fact, I can't remember at the Tour when Vingegaard did beat Pogacar in a sprint. So it's going to be really hard for Vingegaard to try and beat Pogacar mano a mano. I think he's going to have to try and put him under pressure earlier on some of those climbs in the finale rather than taking it down to a sprint.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. That's a very good point. He hasn't really beaten him. I don't think he's ever beaten him in a mano a mano. Jonas Winger has always played second fiddle. It was only the Col de Granon stage when he properly dropped him, and then the one on the Haute as well. But another factor I want to discuss as well, Jonas Winger has had this huge break from the Tour de France, done the Crow race, etc., etc. Tadej Gacha has had a monstrous season, basically from the gun almost, and here we are at basically the final race of the World Tour. So do you think that's going to play into his his fatigue potentially, like seeing Giro d'Emilia, him kind of fading away in the crucial moment? Do you think potentially that could happen as well?
Yeah, that's a really good point, actually, because like you say, Pogacar has done a lot of racing this year. He's got to be one of the riders with the most race days, and especially when you take into consideration the fact that he's been to the World Championships, where there's a lot of airtime involved with being over there and then getting back, and also the kind of the jet lag adaptation as well. I certainly think that that could play a factor into this race. And like you say, because he was beaten by Mas the other day at Emilia, I think it's possible that Pogacar could suffer from this, but he is, at the end of the day, one of the top athletes in our sport. Arguably, some people could say he is the top rider in our sport. It will be hard to beat him. I think it's really going to be difficult to say from kind of a pundit's standpoint what he is going to be like. All that I can say is that yes, he did get dropped the other day at Emilia, but it could be this is, he wasn't peaking for Emilia. It's just that he was still coming back a little bit from the World Championships where evidently he didn't seem at his best for some reason, and we can't really quite pin that down. It's possible that he is just in the process of building into a fitness peak towards Il Lombardia, and therefore he intentionally doesn't have the best legs at the moment to try and be in his best form at Lombardia. I think that Vingegaard, like you say, coming fresh off the Tour, I feel like that does play into his advantage, and definitely when it comes to the latter, mainly the last hour of this race, that he should have the advantage because he has that kind of freshness, which should mean that he could launch a bit more of a devastating attack as opposed to Pogacar, I guess.
Yeah, I think that's a very fair assessment. But moving on, It's not just about Jonas Winger and Tadej Gacha. There is also movie star coming here with Alejandro Valverde. It's his last ever race in the World Tour, and also Enric Mas, fresh off winning Giro Emilia, as we just spoke about, and also finishing second in the Vuelta a España. This is quite an interesting prospect, these two. They work quite well in Bologna, but do you think Mas can even win this with the help of Valverde?
I think that it is possible because although I have seen some very good points about Mass's proficiency going downhill, for example, I think that we saw that at Tirreno this year. I remember, I think it was the second to last stage, which Pogacar won. I think Mass crashed on the descent. So I think that does certainly bring into question his ability to win this race. But it's also worth noting that perhaps people think that Pogacar is this world-class descender, but he was, caught on a descent last year by Fausto Masnada. So obviously Pogacar is not the best descender in the world. Massa isn't the best either. And I think that this race is largely won on the climbs rather than the descents, although Nibali could of course probably have something to say about that. But it's the complement of the two that really create the winner of this race. At the end of the day, it's going to be the kind of the legs on the climbs which are going to make the largest difference. So I think that Mas, after all, he looked so good the other day at Emilia. I do think that he could win this race, but I think it would more than likely be, he wouldn't be able to come down to a sprint. He'd have to get rid of Pogacar. I feel like he could probably take Vingegaard in a one-on-one sprint. I think it would be a bit of a coin cost there, but I think that he would have to try and get rid of Pogacar before a sprint for sure.
Yeah, I think you're completely right there. But talking about someone else, Adam Yates and Simon Yates, I'm just going to group them in together, even though they're not in the same team. One of them riding for Ineos, the other one riding for, well, Ineos until next year when he's riding for UAE. Adam Yates, let's start with him. Seventh when winning the Deutschland Tour, seventh in the GP Quebec, fourth in GP Montreal, third last year in Il Lombardia. Do you think potentially he could be a dark horse here, like his final race for Ineos Grenadiers, and could do something spectacular?
Yeah, I think that
And Simon Yates, what do you think about him?
Oh yeah. Adam Yates, I think that it's a strange one because he has a lot of the qualities that should do very well in this sort of race. I feel like arguably he is very suited towards the parcours this year, very punchy. I think that he always provides stiff competition towards Pogacar. I feel especially in these sort of very punchy climbs, especially when you think back to Montreal on that last lap, he was really putting everybody to the sword of that final climb. I feel like the only question mark over Yates is the fact that he DNF'd Emilia the other day. I can't quite remember. I don't know why it happened, whether it was a legs thing, whether it was a crash. I'm not really too sure. Or whether he's just saving his energy for Lombardia. I feel like that's the only question mark I have over him. Other than that small kind of detail, I feel like he is a favourite for this race. His sprint, kind of similar to Vingegaard and Massa with the same problem. It's not the fastest, so he would have to get rid of Pogacar as well. But I do think that Yates is a favourite for this race. I would favour Adam Yates over Simon Yates, mainly just because I feel like Adam Yates just has a bit more consistency about him. I feel like Simon Yates can just kind of really blow hot and cold. I'm not really too sure which kind of rider I'm going to get on the day. He, of course, DNF'd Emilia and he came 12th at Agostoni, the one that was won by Bax the other day, which is quite surprising, but he was dropped from that group. He didn't make the move which contained Valverde, Formolo, Pozzovivo, Aran, etc., all riders who were kind of protagonists in Emilia. So that does make me a bit concerned about Simon Yates just because he didn't make that front group the other day. If he's not making that front group in that race, then he's probably not going to make the front group in this race.
But anyway, there are several other riders also coming to this race. Benoit Cosnefroid has been looking very strong recently. Vlasov is also here. Bahrain victorious with Matej Mohoric, who won the Crow race, is on very good form right now. But Patrick, is there, and Julien Philippe, we have question marks what he's going to be doing. But Patrick, is there anyone really that you see as kind of a dark horse for this race?
I would probably be looking towards EF with probably Aran, who has had a bit of a resurgence in the last part, especially since he won that stage of the Vuelta. He looked really good at Emilia the other day. He was launching attacks and looking like the Aran of old. And there's just a part of me which thinks that it'll be nice to see Aran with this race. I think that he's definitely kind of might be given a bit of leeway as he's not one of the pure favourites. And I think it'd be nice for EF, after all this battling with UCI points, to try and really kind of get something really positive out of the season.
Anyways, before we finish, we're going to finish on our predictions. And Patrick, who is your top three for this year's Il Lombardia?
My top three is going to be, I think that in third place will be Tadej Pogacar. Second place, I think, will be Rigoberto Urán, and I think that Enric Mas will win.
Fair enough. Yeah, I was gonna pick Enric Mas, but I don't want to have the same podium. So I'll say, well, third place is gonna be Matthias Skjelmose Jensen. Well, Jakob Fuglsang's here as well, but I'm not gonna pick him. Tadej Pogacar is in second place, and why not? Because you stole my winner. Jonas Winger is gonna win this race. So that's basically it for this preview of the Il Lombardia, the final monument of the season. Make sure to check out Patrick's channel in the description down below. And thank you for listening. If you're on the podcast, subscribe to the channel, like the video, and of course, join our live stream on Saturday. And yeah, as always, thank you for watching and have a nice day.